Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's video devotion. Hope you were able to worship with us yesterday. I preached a sermon from Isaiah on how our security is in God and not other things or places. If you did not get a chance to watch that service and worship with us, please do so. You can catch the sermon on our YouTube channel, Facebook page, and also on our website. So I hope you'll check that out. Today, our New Testament reading plan, and I hope you're reading with us, has us in 1 Peter chapter 3. 1 Peter chapter 3. And what I wrote in my journal as a summary of my takeaway in this chapter, and I'll just read it to you, and then we'll look at some verses and talk about them. What I wrote was, in responding to evil and persecution, don't become evil. Don't let it change you so that you act like they do. And instead act like Jesus did during his trial, during his time of persecution and suffering. If you'll notice in 1 Peter 3, starting at verse 8, let's just read some verses together, 8 through 11. He says, to sum up, all of you be harmonious, sympathetic, brotherly, kind-hearted, and humble in spirit, not returning evil for evil or insult for insult, but giving a blessing instead. For you were called for this very purpose, that you might inherit a blessing. For the one who desires life, to love and see good days, must keep his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. Verse 11, he must turn away from evil and do good. He must seek peace and pursue it. And then dropping down to verses 13 and following, excuse me, who is there to harm you if you prove zealous for what is good? But even if you should suffer for the sake of righteousness, you are blessed. And do not fear their intimidation, and do not be troubled. But sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts, always being ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you. Yet, notice this, yet with gentleness and reverence. And keep a good conscience, so that in the thing in which you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ will be put to shame. For it is better, if God should will it so, that you suffer for doing what is right rather than doing what is wrong. For Christ also died for sins once for all, the just for the unjust, so that he might bring us to God, having put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit. It's interesting that what he says in these verses is that when you suffer, when people mistreat you, don't return evil for evil. Don't return insult for insult. Instead, there is to be kindness and love, and on he goes. When you and I go through challenging times and persecution and trials, it's not easy. Also, it's not easy when people hurt you to remain kind and humble. It's not easy to hold your tongue, and yet that's the very thing that he says here. How do we do that? How do we hold back? How do we show kindness in the face of hostility? Well, two things. In verse 15, he says, sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts. But sanctify means to designate, to set apart for a sacred use. So your heart needs to be set apart, set aside for Christ. It needs to be a sacred place where he rules, where he is Lord. And then in verse 16, keep a good conscience. Keep your conscience clean. Here's where I'm going with all this. I'm like many of you. There's a lot of us who are, concerned about our country and some of the changes that are taking place in our culture and in our nation. And we're all concerned about those changes when it comes to changing values, changes or attacks on religious liberty, hostility to biblical truth even. But I'm also concerned about those of us who are followers of Christ as we face these challenges and these changing times, that we respond in the same way that the people who are hostile toward us. In other words, that in the midst of the hostility and the persecution and the challenges, we allow ourselves to become evil. How? By not being kind and humble, returning evil for evil, returning insult for insult, not holding our tongue, saying things that we should not say. He says in here that we are to be a witness for Christ in the midst of hostility and hardship by the way we treat people, the way we respond, let them see that Jesus is Lord of our lives, be prepared to make a defense for our faith. But notice he says, make the defense in verse 15 with gentleness, and with reverence, keeping our conscience clean. So, as you and I stand up for truth in this changing culture of America, we need to do that. We need to vote. We need to vote our biblical convictions and values, stand up for truth. But we can't stand up for truth the way the world stands up for whatever they are supporting. We have to do it the way Christ tells us to. And so, yes, we stand up for truth. We speak truth. We vote. We participate. We're involved. But we have to do it like followers of Christ, which means we have to do it with kindness and with gentleness and with humility, holding our tongue, not returning insult for insult or evil for evil, and make a defense. Explain why, but do it with gentleness and reverence. And so Jesus is our example. This is from chapter 3. If you'll remember back in chapter 2 of 1 Peter, chapter 2 of 1 Peter, we're told that Christ endured his suffering, but he did it with kindness. So yes, we stand for truth, we live for truth, we participate in this culture, but we do it with kindness and with gentleness. So here's where I'm going. As you and I are concerned about America, and as we vote and as we engage, vote and be engaged, but do it like Christians. Don't defend the truth with hostility and anger. Don't defend the truth. In other words, don't let the world change you so that your behavior is like their behavior, your speech is like their behavior. You insult people the way they insult people. You revile people the way they revile people. Learn to be engaged in this messed up world, but do it in a way that shows humility and kindness while you stand for the truth. That's what Jesus did. That's what he wants us to do. And in the weeks and months to come in our country, it's really important that as Christians, we stand up for truth, but we better stand the right way. Because if we stand up the wrong way and we act like the world acts with our speech and our attitude and our anger, we're not honoring God. How we do it matters just as much as what we do. God bless you. I'll see you tomorrow.